Location: Sector 4, the Ridge of Bones. Time: T-10 seconds to contact. 27. Lieutenant Commander, that heat signature isn't a goat. It's a spotter. Adjust your sector scan left, 30 degrees. Elara's voice was a flat line over the comms, devoid of the panic that should have been there. Negative, Vance. We have clear air. Drone feed is green. Stop seeing ghosts, Miller snapped back, his breath ragged in the microphone. The sound of shifting gravel echoed. The seals were moving up the slope, aggressive, loud, exposed. It's a fatal funnel, Miller. They want you to push the ridge. Pull back to the defilade, now! We are Tier 1, Sergeant. We don't hide in holes. Echo 2, initiate suppression on my mark. Elara closed her eyes for a heartbeat, her finger hovering over the trigger of her suppressed Mk-13. She wasn't looking at the scope anymore. She was looking at the timeline of the inevitable. If you crest that ridge, Miller, I can't cover you. You're walking into a kill box. Watch us work, Vance. Echo leader out. The radio clicked off. Then came the distinct, terrifying crack of a Dragunov. Then another. Then 20 more. And then the screaming started. 72 hours earlier, Forward Operating Base Chapman. The briefing room at Bagram Airfield smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and aggressive testosterone. It was a scent Sergeant First Class Elara Vance knew intimately. The olfactory signature of men who believed they were invincible. She stood in the back, leaning against a reinforced Pelican case, her arms crossed. Her uniform was sterile, devoid of the morale patches and operator flair that the 8 men sitting in the front row wore like peacock feathers. To them, she was furniture, or worse, a mandate. All right, stow the chatter. Lieutenant Commander Jax Miller walked to the front, slapping a dossier onto the metal table. Miller was the archetype of a SEAL team leader, broad-shouldered, beard groomed to perfection, eyes hard as flint. We have a green light for op, blind faith, insertion into the Khost Province at Sword 200 Zulu. He clicked a remote. A topographical map of a jagged valley appeared on the screen. Intel says a Reaper drone went down here. Contains a drive with encrypted localized asset data. We go in, blow the bird, grab the drive, and get out. Simple. Who's the babysitter? The voice came from Tex, the team's heavy weapons specialist. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder at Elara. Miller didn't look at her. He looked at his men with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. That is SFC Vance. Command says we need a specialized reconnaissance asset for the terrain analysis. Apparently, our own eyes aren't good enough for the brass. Elara pushed off the case and stepped into the light. I'm attached for long-range surveillance and overwatch, Commander, not terrain analysis. Miller picked up her file, flipping it open. He made a show of reading it, brows furrowing in mock confusion. Vance, Elara, Army, Special Ops Support. Let's see here. Combat rotations. He paused, looking up at his team, waiting for the punchline. 1. Just the one tour, 2018. The room erupted in low, scoffing chuckles. 1 tour? Tex laughed, shaking his head. I've got boots that have seen more combat than that. Hey, go easy, another operator, Doc, chimed in, though his tone was dripping with patronage. Everyone has a first rodeo. Just stay in the back, sweetheart, and try not to flag us with your muzzle. Elara's expression didn't shift. She didn't blink. The file said 1 tour. It didn't mention that the tour lasted 38 months. It didn't mention the sad paramilitary unit she was embedded with in Syria. It didn't mention that she was the only one who came back from Aleppo. It didn't mention the 27 ambushes she had survived then, or the scars that ran like a roadmap of pain down her back. "The Coast Valley is known as the Devil's Throat," Elara said, her voice soft but cutting through their laughter. "The acoustics amplify movement. If you go in heavy, they'll hear you 5 clicks out. I recommend a stealth approach. Suppressed only, no heavy armor." Miller tossed the file back onto the table. It slid, hitting the edge with a dull thud. "Thank you for the input, Sergeant. But Echo Team doesn't tiptoe. We own the night. You just worry about carrying the extra batteries." Miller turned his back to her, addressing his men. "Load out is heavy. Plate carriers, MK-18s, and 40 Mike. We hit them fast, we hit them hard." Elara looked at the map on the screen. The valley was a funnel, a perfect geological kill box. She felt that familiar prickle at the base of her neck, the 6th sense that had kept her breathing when better men had died. She looked at Miller's confident back, then at the grinning faces of the team. They were wolves, certainly, but they were walking into a bear den. "Copy that, Commander," Elara whispered, the words lost under the sound of chairs scraping and gear being hoisted. She picked up her MK-13 Mod 5 sniper rifle, checking the bolt. The action was smooth, silent. Unlike the SEALs, she didn't need to be loud to be deadly. "One tour," she murmured to herself. "Let's hope you survive yours." The interior of the MH-60 Blackhawk was a vibrating cage of noise and shadow. They were flying dark, no running lights, hugging the jagged spine of the mountains to stay under the radar floor. Elara sat near the door gunner, her knees pulled in tight. The air grew colder as they ascended, the temperature dropping rapidly in the coast highlands. She adjusted the focus on her AN/PVS-31 night vision goggles. The world turned into a grainy, monochromatic green tunnel. Across from her, the SEALs of Echo Team were statues of lethality. Miller was checking his wrist GPS. Tex was tapping his gloved fingers against the receiver of his MK-48 machine gun. They looked eager. They looked like men who trusted their technology implicitly. 1 minute! The crew chief held up a single finger. Elara checked her MK-13 one last time. Chamber empty, safety on, optics covered. She wasn't jumping with a carbine like the rest of them. The long rifle was awkward, a liability in the fast rope descent if she didn't control it perfectly. The bird flared hard, the nose pitching up as the pilot bled speed. The stomach-churning drop in altitude signaled they were over the LZ. Dust billowed up instantly, a brown-out cloud engulfing the helicopter. "Ropes! Ropes! Ropes!" The thick braided lines were kicked out. The SEALs moved with practiced fluidity, sliding into the abyss one by one. Elara waited for her slot. Last man out. She grabbed the heavy rope, wrapped her boots around it, and let gravity take her. The descent was a blur of friction and heat. Her boots hit the hard-packed earth with a jarring thud. She immediately unclipped, rolled to the periphery of the rotor wash, and brought her weapon up. The helicopter didn't linger. The ropes were cut away or pulled up, and the bird banked sharply, disappearing into the night sky. Silence slammed back into the valley. It was absolute. Heavy. Elara lay prone in the scrub brush, scanning her sector. Through her tubes, the valley floor looked like the surface of the moon. Rocks, craters, and low walls of dried mud. "Echo 1 status," Miller's voice crackled in her earpiece. "1 up, good," came the reply from the point man. 2 up. 3 up. They did their roll call. Elara remained silent, her eyes sweeping the ground 10 meters ahead of the point man. Something was wrong. "Vance, report," Miller snapped. "Sierra is set," she whispered. "But hold position, do not advance." "Say again?" Miller's tone was incredulous. "We are 5 mics behind schedule. We move now." "Negative, Commander. Look at the scrub to your 12 o'clock. The dust hasn't settled right." "We just had a Black Hawk land on top of us, Vance. Of course there's dust." "No," Elara insisted, her heart rate remaining forcefully slow. "The wash blew the topsoil away. But look at the rocks near the trailhead. They're clean, too clean. Someone swept them." She could feel the eyes of the team on her, even in the dark. To them, she was stalling, being timid. This was the one-tour mentality they expected, seeing ghosts in every shadow. "Drone feed was green for 6 hours prior, Vance," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, a dangerous warning. "Thermal shows no heat signatures within 3 clicks. You are delaying my operation." "Heat signatures don't show buried wires, sir." "Echo 1, move out. Stay tight," Miller ordered, overriding her. The point man, a lanky operator named Davis, stood up from his crouch. He looked back at Elara for a split second, the green glow of his nods masking his expression, but his body, language screamed dismissal. He turned and took a step onto the hard-packed trail leading toward the canyon entrance. Elara scrambled up, breaking protocol. She didn't use the radio. She lunged forward, grabbing the back of the nearest operator's plate carrier to pull him back, hissing, "Get down!" "What the hell are you doing?" Miller hissed, stepping toward her. "Get back in formation, Sergeant, or I will zip-tie you right here and leave you for the extract." "It's a funnel," Elara said, pointing at the path. "No animal tracks. Even the goats avoid this strip. Why would goats avoid a flat path in a rocky valley?" "Because we're in the middle of nowhere," Tex grunted, shifting his machine gun. "Man, she's gun-shy. Let's go." Miller shoved Elara's shoulder, pushing her back. "Rear guard, Vance, that's a direct order. One more word and you're done." He signaled Davis to continue. Elara stopped. She didn't argue. She didn't fight. She simply took 3 steps backward, putting a large boulder between herself and the main element. It was a cold, calculated move. If she was right, standing with them was suicide. If she was wrong, she would face a court-martial. She preferred the court-martial. Davis took 5 more steps. He reached the bottleneck where the rocks narrowed. His boot landed on a patch of loose gravel that looked perfectly natural to the untrained eye. It wasn't a pressure plate. It was a crush wire. The sound wasn't a bang. It was a crump, a concussive wave that you felt in your lungs before you heard it in your ears. The ground beneath Davis evaporated. A plume of fire and black earth erupted upward, tearing through the silence of the valley. The shockwave knocked Miller off his feet. Tex was thrown sideways. The night vision goggles flared out, blinded by the sudden intensity of the explosion, turning the green world into a blinding white washout. Elara squeezed her eyes shut and opened her mouth to equalize the pressure, debris raining down on her helmet like hail. "Contact! Contact front!" someone screamed, but the voice was high, panicked, barely recognizing itself. The dust cloud from the IED hadn't even settled when the first tracer rounds snapped from the ridgeline above them. They had been watching. They had been waiting for the mouse to snap the trap. Elara didn't fire. She didn't move. She lay perfectly still in the shadow of the boulder, listening to the chaos erupt, counting the seconds between the explosion and the follow-up fire. 1, 2, 3. They were disciplined. The enemy waited for the dust to clear to pick their targets. "Man down! Davis is down!" Miller was roaring over the comms, his voice fighting through the ringing in his ears. "Suppress the ridge! Suppress!" The SEALs opened up, their rifles barking in a chaotic rhythm, pouring lead into the dark mountainside. It was loud. It was aggressive. It was exactly what the enemy wanted. Elara pulled her rifle into her shoulder. She wasn't looking at the ridge where the tracers were coming from. She was looking at the flank, 40 degrees to the left, where the darkness was deepest. That was where the real kill shot would come from. Ambush number 1. 26 to go. The valley floor had transformed into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Doc, get on Davis. Tex, give me hate on that ridge." Miller's voice tore through the chaotic symphony of gunfire. The IED had done its work. Davis was a crumpled heap of multicam and gear 5 meters from the crater, screaming a sound that wasn't quite human. A high, wet keening that cut through the roar of Tex's MK-48 machine gun. The heavy gunner was standing exposed, screaming expletives as he walked rounds across the ridge line, the belt of ammunition chattering through the feed tray like a jagged metal snake. Elara didn't fire. She stayed low, her cheek pressed into the dirt behind the boulder. She watched the tracer fire from the ridge. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, controlled. Short bursts, 3 to 5 rounds. Pause. Shift target. "Vance, get your weapon up!" Miller crawled past her, dragging Davis by his plate carrier handle. "Suppression! I need suppression!" "It's a PKM," Elara said, though she knew he couldn't hear her over the din. "Dug in behind rock. You're just making noise." She looked at Davis. His left leg was a ruin. The blast had shredded the pants and the flesh beneath. Blood was pumping out in bright arterial spurts, turning the gray dust into black mud. Doc was already there, knees sliding in the gore, ripping open a cat tourniquet with his teeth. "High and tight! High and tight!" Doc yelled, cranking the windlass until Davis's screaming turned into a gasp of shock. The enemy fire shifted. They saw the medic working. The rounds started impacting closer, kicking up geysers of dirt around Doc and Miller. The SEALs were reacting with aggressive violence of action. The standard Tier 1 response to an ambush. Assault through. But you couldn't assault up a 60-degree scree slope against a heavy machine gun that had the angle on you. "Echo 2, Echo 3, flank left, push the incline," Miller ordered. "Negative," Elara whispered to herself. "That's the fatal funnel." She looked at the terrain. The enemy commander knew the SEALs would try to flank left. It was the only cover available. He would have a secondary gun waiting there. Elara made a choice. She reached up and clicked her radio volume down to 0. She didn't want Miller's voice in her head for what came next. While the SEALs poured thousands of rounds into the ridge, creating a wall of sound and light, Elara rolled onto her back and slid deeper into the shadows of the defilade, moving away from the team. She wasn't flanking left. She was moving right into the open ground, the kill zone that the enemy assumed no one would be stupid enough to cross. She crawled on her belly, the MK-13 dragged alongside her. The rocks dug into her elbows, scraping skin raw, but she didn't feel it. Her world narrowed down to the thermal signature of the enemy gunner. Through the chaos, she found a rhythm. The PKM gunner would fire for 6 seconds, then duck to check his feed or cool the barrel. Fire. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, duck. Elara moved during the fire. It was counterintuitive. Every instinct screamed to freeze when the gun went off, but the noise masked her movement, and the muzzle flash ruined the gunner's night vision. She covered 50 meters in 2 minutes. She was now isolated, separated from the unit by open ground. If she was spotted, she was dead. There was no cover here, just low scrub brush. She set up the bipod on a flat rock. She dialed her scope. Distance, 340 meters. Angle, plus 115 degrees. Wind, negligible. Through the scope, the thermal image was clear. The gunner was a white-hot shape hunched over the weapon. But he wasn't the target. If she shot him, another would take his place in 10 seconds. She shifted her aim slightly to the left. There was a second heat signature, smaller, cooler. The spotter, the one directing the fire, the one telling the gunner where to aim. "Miller," she whispered, watching the spotter point toward the SEAL's position. "Don't move." Down below, Miller and 2 others were preparing to rush the slope. The spotter saw them. He tapped the gunner. The barrel swung toward Miller. Elara exhaled, the space between heartbeats. Crack. The suppressed shot was a polite cough compared to the roaring battle. The spotter's head snapped back. He crumpled. The gunner hesitated. He had lost his eyes. He stopped firing and confused, looking over at his partner. Elara racked the bolt. Smooth. Fast. Crack. The gunner slumped forward over the receiver of the PKM. The rhythmic hammering from the ridge stopped instantly. Silence rushed back into the valley, heavy and ringing. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Miller yelled, his voice hoarse. The SEALs stopped shooting, barrels smoking, chests heaving. They waited for the enemy gun to open up again. It didn't. "Echo 2, sit rep!" Miller barked. "Target neutralized," Tex called out, sounding surprised. "I think I got him. I walked a burst right into that nest." Elara lay in the dark, watching the ridge for another 10 seconds. No movement. No secondary gun. She was right. They had put all their eggs in one basket to pin the team down. She collapsed the bipod and crawled backward, retracing her path through the dust until she was back near the boulder where she had started. She clipped her radio back on and turned the volume up just as Miller stormed over. "Vance, where the hell were you?" Miller demanded, looming over her. "I called for sector scan on the right." Elara sat up, brushing dust off her scope. She looked at the ridge, then at Tex, who was high-fiving, another operator. "I was holding rear security, Commander," she lied smoothly. "Checking for movers." Miller stared at her, adrenaline making his pupils huge in the dark. He looked at her clean uniform, then at his men covered in sweat and grime. He shook his head in disgust. "Useless," he muttered, turning away. "Tex, good shooting. You shut that bastard up just in time. Doc, is Davis mobile?" "Stabilized," Doc replied, his hands covered in blood. "But he can't walk. We have to carry him." "We move," Miller ordered. "We are behind schedule, and we just rang the dinner bell for every fighter in 5 clicks. Vance, you take point. Since you like looking at the ground so much, find us a path that isn't rigged." Elara stood up. She felt the phantom recoil of the MK-13 in her shoulder. She looked at the dead ridge one last time. Tex hadn't hit anything but rocks. His spread was too wide. But it didn't matter. They were alive. "Copy, Commander," Elara said. "Moving out." She took the lead, stepping past the crater where Davis's leg had been ruined. She didn't look back at the team. They were already celebrating a victory they hadn't earned, oblivious to the fact that the only reason they were breathing was the woman they despised. 1 down. 26 to go. The transition from the violent cacophony of the ambush to the interior of the canyon was jarring. The Devil's Throat lived up to its name, a narrow, winding laceration in the earth where the moonlight barely scraped the bottom. The walls rose vertically for 200 feet, turning the passage into an acoustic amplifier. Elara moved at the tip of the spear, her pace agonizingly slow. Behind her, the rhythmic scuff-drag of the team carrying Davis echoed like a metronome counting down their remaining time. Carrying a 200-pound operator in full kit, plus the litter, plus their own rucks, was burning through the SEAL's stamina at a terrifying rate. "Pick up the pace, Vance," Miller's whisper hissed in her earpiece. "We are sitting ducks in this choke point." Elara didn't speed up. She slowed down. The ground here was mixed gravel and hardpan. Easy walking, too easy. The enemy commander, the one who had set the ambush at the LZ and the machine gun on the ridge, was not an amateur. He had ceded the ground too willingly. "Hold," Elara signaled, raising a closed fist. She knelt, switching her vision from the green phosphor of her NVGs to the thermal white-hot setting, then back to naked eye. Sometimes technology lied. The thermal showed cooling rocks. The NVGs showed a flat, gray path, but her gut screamed trap. Miller stormed up to her position, his breathing ragged. The stress of the casualty was fraying his edges. "Why are we stopped?" "Davis is bleeding through his dressings. We need to get to the extraction site." "Look at the spacing," Elara whispered, pointing at a cluster of fist-sized rocks on the left side of the trail, and another cluster 10 meters down on the right. "Rocks, Vance. It's a canyon. There are rocks everywhere." "They're markers," she said, her voice flat. "Range markers. This is a pre-sighted kill zone for mortars or a daisy chain." "A daisy chain," Miller scoffed, wiping sweat from his brow. "We haven't seen a single hostile since the ridge. They ran. We broke them." "They didn't run, sir. They retreated to lead us here. This is the path of least resistance. It's exactly where I would herd you." Miller looked back at his team. The men were hunched over, exhausted. The litter bearers were shaking. They needed the easy path. Taking the high road, the scree slope to their right, would add an hour of brutal climbing. "We take the path," Miller decided. "EOD sweeps are clear. No wires." "The wires are buried deep or they're using remote det," Elara countered, stepping in front of him. "If you walk them down this gut, you kill them." Miller stepped into her personal space, the menace palpable. "You are an attachment, Sergeant. You don't make tactical calls. Move out." Elara didn't move. She looked up the steep, loose shale slope to their right. It was miserable terrain, ankle-breaking territory. "I'm taking the high line," she said calmly. "If you want to walk into the grinder, that's on you. But I won't sign off on it." For a second, it looked like Miller might strike her. But the seed of doubt had been planted. If she was right and he walked his men into a daisy chain, his career and his life was over. If he followed her and she was wrong, they just lost time. "Fine," Miller spat, the word tasting like bile. "But if we miss the window because of this detour, I'm writing you up for mission sabotage." He turned to the team. "Change of plan. We're rucking up the slope. Vance thinks the road is haunted." A collective groan rippled through the squad. "You gotta be kidding me," Tex muttered loud enough for her to hear. "She's trying to kill us with cardio." Elara ignored them. She slung her rifle and began the climb. It was brutal. The shale shifted under every step, sliding back half a foot for every foot gained. The SEALs, laden with the heavy litter, cursed with every breath. They slipped, scrambled, and tore their uniforms. The sound of their struggle was loud, but it was masked by the wind howling through the upper cuts of the canyon. It took them 45 minutes to cover 300 meters of lateral distance. They were now perched on a narrow goat trail overlooking the canyon floor they had just avoided. The team collapsed, gasping for air, their anger at Elara radiating like heat. "Happy now?" Miller wheezed, glaring at her. "Empty path. No bad guys, just wasted time and energy." Elara didn't answer. She was watching the trail below through her scope, She saw movement. Shadows detached themselves from the canyon walls. 3 figures. They moved with discipline, weapons raised, scanning the empty path where the seals should have been. One of the figures stopped near the cluster of rocks Elara had pointed out. He knelt, checking something. Then he stood up and spoke into a radio. He kicked the ground in frustration. Elara adjusted her focus. The man had just checked the receiver for the command-detonated IEDs. "Commander," Elara said softly, "check your 6 o'clock. Down in the gut." Miller crawled over, pulling out his monocular. He looked down. He saw the 3 fighters. He saw the leader gesturing at the kill zone, the exact spot where Echo Team would have been walking if they had stayed on the path. Miller stiffened. He watched as the enemy leader waved his hand, and 5 more fighters emerged from spider holes camouflaged in the canyon walls. It had been a complex ambush, a devastating L-shaped kill box. If they had taken the road, they would all be dead. Miller lowered his monocular. He looked at Elara. For a moment, the arrogance wavered. There was no apology in his eyes. Tier 1 operators didn't apologize to support personnel. But there was a flicker of recalibration. "They're tracking us," Miller said, his voice tight. "Yes," Elara replied, checking the action on her rifle. "And now they know we didn't take the bait. They'll stop being subtle." "We move," Miller said, turning back to the men, his tone shifting from anger to urgency. "On your feet. We aren't safe yet." The SEALs stood up, groaning under the weight of the litter. They didn't see what Miller saw. They only knew that Elara had dragged them up a mountain for no apparent reason. "Useless witch," one of them muttered as he hefted the litter handle. Elara heard it. She looked at the enemy patrol below, now spreading out, sniffing the ground for their spoor. She didn't correct the team. Let them hate her. Hate was fuel, and they were going to need a lot of it for what was coming next. The silence of the valley was over. The hunt had begun. The sun broke over the Hindu Kush like a fractured yoke, bleeding orange light across the jagged peaks. For SEAL Team Echo, the sunrise wasn't a relief. It was an exposure. They had been climbing for 2 hours since bypassing the canyon floor. The ascent to Point Alpha, a craggy promontory offering a direct line of sight to the satellite constellation, had depleted the last of their adrenaline. Davis, strapped to the collapsible litter, was a dead weight that required 4 men to move. His moans had quieted into a rhythmic, worrying wheeze. "Set security," Miller croaked, dropping to one knee. His face was caked in dust, sweat cutting rivulets through the grime. "Comms, get that antenna up. I want a medevac bird spinning up 5 minutes ago." "On it." The comms specialist, a young petty officer named Reynolds, unslung his pack. He began assembling the SATCOM antenna, the metallic clink-clack sounding dangerously loud in the thin, mountain air. Elara didn't sit. She moved to the edge of the perimeter, finding a wedge between 2 slabs of granite. She deployed her spotting scope, draping a shema over her head to cut the glare. The position was perfect. Too perfect. It offered a 360-degree view, but it also silhouetted them against the morning sky. "Commander," Elara said, keeping her eye on the glass, "we're skylining. If they have eyes on the adjacent peaks, we're a silhouette target." "We need the signal, Vance," Miller snapped, cracking a chem light to check a map he already knew by heart. "We can't carry Davis out of here on foot. We need a bird." Reynolds knelt, holding the handset to his ear. "Echo Base, this is Highlander. Radio check. Over." Static. "Echo Base, Highlander. Do you read?" Elara scanned the ridgeline opposite them, about 600 meters away. The heat haze was starting to rise, making the air shimmer. It was difficult to spot a shooter in these conditions, but she looked for what didn't belong. Straight lines in a world of jagged curves. She saw it. A glint. Not a scope reflection, too amateur, but the sun catching a barrel shifted slightly in the shadow. "Sniper!" Elara screamed, rolling away from the edge. The crack of the rifle arrived a split second later. It didn't hit a man. It hit the box. The round, a heavy caliber, likely .338 Lapua, punched through the main housing of the PRC-117 radio on Reynolds's back. The impact threw the young sailor forward, face first into the dirt. Sparks showered the dry grass, followed instantly by the acrid smell of burning circuitry and lithium battery acid. "Contact! 3 o'clock!" Miller roared, bringing his rifle up. Before they could return fire, a second shot rang out from the 9 o'clock position, then a third from the 12. Triangulation. "They're walking it in!" Tex yelled, firing a burst blindly into the valley. "I can't see them!" "Smoke! Pop smoke!" Miller ordered. 2 canisters of M18 red smoke hissed open, creating a thick, choking cloud that obscured their vision, but also hid them from the crossfire. "Grab Reynolds! Get the radio!" Miller commanded. "The radio is toast, sir!" Reynolds coughed, dragging the smoking ruin of the backpack. "It's dead! The crypto module is shattered! Move! Bounding retreat! South face!" Miller didn't hesitate. He knew the tactic. If they stayed in the smoke, the enemy would just mortar the cloud. They had to move while they were invisible. "Alpha team, bound! Beta team, set!" Elara didn't wait for the command. She was already moving, sliding down the scree slope on her backside, her rifle held high across her chest. She wasn't fleeing, she was positioning. The enemy had set up a kill box on the summit, expecting the SEALs to hunker down. By dropping elevation immediately, they were changing the geometry of the engagement. The team tumbled down the slope, sliding more than running, the litter with Davis bouncing dangerously between the bearers. Bullets snapped the air where their heads had been seconds before, kicking up angry puffs of limestone dust. They didn't stop until they hit the tree line, a sparse collection of twisted pines 300 meters below the summit. They crashed into the cover, chests heaving, lungs burning from the altitude and the panic. Miller grabbed Reynolds by the vest. "Fix it. Tell me you can fix it." Reynolds looked at the radio. The bullet had passed clean through the main processor and exited the battery pack. It was a brick. "Negative, sir. It's gone. We have no long-range comms, no SATCOM, no air support." The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Elara watched the ridgeline above them. The shooting had stopped. They weren't pursuing. "They didn't want to kill us," Elara said, her voice quiet, clinical. Miller spun on her, his eyes wild. "They just shot at us from 3 sides, Vance. What do you call that?" "They aimed for the radio, Commander. The first shot was center mass on the gear, not the man." She pointed to the smoking hole in the unit. "They want us deaf. They want us isolated." "Why?" Tex asked, checking his ammo count. "Why not just wipe us out?" "Because a dead patrol is a tragedy," Elara said, looking out into the vast, empty expanse of the valley. "But a lost patrol, a patrol that disappears slowly, that's a message. They want to break us down piece by piece." Miller stood up, his jaw set. He looked at Davis, who was unconscious now, his face pale as ash. He looked at the useless radio. He looked at the sky where the drone should have been. "We're on our own," Miller said, the reality settling in like a stone in his gut. "Check ammo. Check water. We're running the gauntlet." Elara checked her magazine. She had fired 2 shots in 6 hours. The SEALs had fired hundreds. "Save your rounds," she advised, though she doubted they would listen. "We have 70 hours left before the fail-safe window closes, and they are going to make us bleed for every minute of it." She looked back up at the false summit. It stood majestic and empty against the sun. It had been a beacon of hope, and now it was just another rock in a land of rocks. They were blind. They were deaf. And they were being hunted by ghosts. The temperature in the Khost Mountains didn't fall. It crashed. By Zoro 200 Zulu, the mercury had plummeted 20 degrees, turning the sweat-soaked uniforms of SEAL Team Echo into freezing shrouds. They had established a hasty patrol base in a cluster of limestone formations, a natural fortress that offered cover from 3 sides. It was a good position for a gunfight. It was a terrible position for what the enemy was actually doing. "Lights out. Absolute stillness," Miller whispered, his voice raspy. "We run 50% security. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Eat, hydrate, change socks." Elara sat with her back against the cold stone, her knees drawn up. She didn't open an MRE. She didn't change her socks. She simply closed her eyes and let her brain shut down, keeping one hand on the pistol grip of her rifle. "How can she sleep?" Reynolds whispered to Tex. The comms specialist was shivering, staring into the black void beyond their perimeter. "We're surrounded." "She's checked out," Tex muttered, adjusting his night vision goggles. "Doesn't care if we wake up or not." Elara heard them. She wasn't asleep, not in the civilian sense. She was in a tactical drift, a state of suspended consciousness where the body rested, but the auditory cortex remained a tripwire. It was a skill honed during 3 years in Aleppo, where sleep was a luxury paid for in blood. The SEALs, trained for high-intensity, short-duration raids, were vibrating with residual adrenaline. They were crashing hard, their bodies demanding the rest they were denying themselves out of fear. Around 300, the noises started. It wasn't gunfire. It was subtle. A rock clattering down the slope 50 meters out, the snap of a dry twig, a rhythmic tapping on stone. "Movement, 11 o'clock, Davis whispered from the litter, his voice delirious with pain and morphine. "I see them. They're coming." "Easy, Davis," Doc soothed him, keeping a hand on his chest. "There's nothing there. Thermal is clear." "They're wearing cloaks," Davis insisted, his eyes wide and unseeing in the dark. "Thermal blankets. They hide the heat." Elara opened one eye. Davis wasn't entirely wrong. The enemy knew about thermal optics. They wouldn't walk upright into a scope. They were crawling inch by inch, or throwing rocks to provoke a reaction. "Ignore it," Elara said softly, her voice carrying across the small circle. "They are testing your discipline. If you shoot, you die." "Shut up, Vance," Miller snapped, though he was scanning the perimeter with frantic intensity. "Tex, scan that sector. Reynolds, watch the rear." The psychological pressure was physical. The silence between the noises was heavier than the noise itself. Every SEAL was staring through their green phosphor tubes, straining to find a target in the grain. The brain, starved of sensory input and sleep, began to fill in the gaps. Bushes became crouching men. Shadows became gun barrels. Click. The sound of a bolt racking echoed from the darkness. Not from the SEALs, but from out there. "Did you hear that?" Reynolds hissed, bringing his carbine up. "They're right on top of us." "Hold fire," Elara commanded, her tone sharp. "It's a recording, or a rock hitting metal. They want you to panic." "I see movement!" Reynolds yelled, panic finally breaking the dam of his discipline. He saw a shadow detach itself from a tree trunk. a dark shape lunging forward. "Reynolds! Negative!" Miller barked. Too late. Reynolds squeezed the trigger. His Mk-18 erupted, a 3-round burst shattering the night. The muzzle flash was blinding in the pitch black, a strobe light that illuminated the entire patrol base for a fraction of a second. The rounds sparked harmlessly off a boulder 30 meters away. There was no scream, no return fire, just the echo of the shots rolling down the valley. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Miller grabbed Reynolds by the shoulder harness, slamming him back against the rock. "What do you see? Report!" Reynolds was panting, eyes wild. He was there. He was right there with a knife. Elara stood up slowly. She didn't check the sector Reynolds had fired at. She checked the sky. "Pack up," she said, slinging her pack. "We have 3 minutes." "What?" Miller turned to her. "We hold here. If we move now, we're exposed." "You just lit a flare in a dark room, Commander," Elara said, pointing to the spot where the muzzle flash had been. "Every spotter in the valley knows exactly where we are. They won't shoot. They'll drop a mortar on this grid." As if puncturing her sentence, a distant thump sounded from the deep valley floor. It was a soft, hollow sound, the distinctive report of a 60-millimeter mortar tube. "Incoming!" Tex screamed. "Move! Move! Move!" Miller roared, grabbing one end of the litter. The team scrambled, abandoning the perimeter, dragging Davis's dead weight over the sharp rocks. They were sprinting blindly into the dark, discipline forgotten in the face of indirect fire. They made it 50 meters before the first round impacted. It hit the center of their abandoned patrol base. The explosion was deafening, sending shrapnel whistling through the air where they had been sitting seconds before. Dust and rock chips rained down on their retreating backs. Then came the second thump, then a third. They were being bracketed. "Into the draw! Get into the draw!" Miller directed them toward a shallow ravine. They tumbled into the depression, bodies tangling with gear. They lay there gasping, hearts hammering against their ribs. The mortars continued to pound the empty rocks above them for another minute, then stopped. The enemy knew they had moved. The game had shifted from hide and seek to a fox hunt. Miller crawled over to Reynolds, grabbing his vest. "You almost got us killed, son." Reynolds was sobbing quietly, the stress breaking him. "I saw him, sir. I swear." "You saw what they wanted you to see," Elara said from the edge of the ravine. She was scanning the ridgeline above them. "They used noise to wind you up, and you snapped." She looked at Miller. The commander was shaken. His team was cracking. The fatigue was setting in, and they hadn't even reached the halfway point. "We can't stop again," Elara said. "If we stop, we sleep. If we sleep, we die. We have to walk until daylight." Miller looked at his men. They were zombies. But he nodded. "On your feet," Miller ordered, his voice hollow. "We walk." Elara took the point again. She felt the exhaustion dragging at her limbs, but she pushed it down into a box in her mind. This was the difference. The SEALs were sprinters, used to overwhelming violence for 30 minutes. She was a marathon runner through hell, and the night had only just begun. The next 3 hours were not a battle. They were a systematic dismantling. The enemy didn't commit to a fight. They didn't stand and trade blows. They picked at the edges of the formation like crows stripping a carcass. A single rifle shot from the left flank would force the SEALs to drop the litter, deploy online, and return fire. As soon as the SEALs achieved fire superiority, the enemy would vanish. Then, 5 minutes later, a burst from the right flank. Drop, deploy, Fire, move, drop, deploy, fire, move. It was the grinder, a tactical loop designed to burn calories, water, and ammunition. Contact right. 2 shooters, Tex screamed, his voice cracking from thirst. He unleashed a 20-round burst from his MK-48 into a cluster of rocks. Conserve your ammo, Miller roared, stumbling as he raised his rifle. Short bursts, talking guns, odd numbers fire, even numbers reload. Elara didn't fire. She knelt behind a scrub oak, watching the dust settle. There were no bodies behind the rocks, just empty brass. The enemy was trading 10 cents of lead for 10 pounds of seal sweat. They're gone, Commander, Elara said, her voice dry as parchment. We need to keep moving. We move when I say we move, Miller snapped, turning on her. His eyes were rimmed with red, his face a mask of grime and fury. Check fire, pick up the package. The package, Davis, was now a liability that threatened to kill them all. The 4 men carrying the litter were rotating every 10 minutes, their arms trembling, muscles spasming with lactic acid. They were moving through a labyrinth of wadis and dried riverbeds, the terrain fighting them as hard as the insurgents. Ambush number 12 happened at a dry creek crossing. It was a classic L-shaped setup, but small scale. As the point man, Martinez, stepped into the open creek bed, the air snapped. Crack, thwack. The sound of the bullet hitting the ceramic plate was distinct, a dull, heavy slap. Martinez spun around, winded, falling onto his back. Man down! Suppress! Suppress! The team erupted. Tex and Reynolds poured fire into the tree line. Miller dragged Martinez back into cover. I'm good, Martinez wheezed, clutching his chest. Caught it on the plate. Ribs are broken, but no penetration. Get up, Miller ordered. We can't stop. But as Martinez tried to stand, a second shot rang out. This one didn't hit a plate. It took Simmons, the rear guard, through the neck. There was no sound from Simmons, just the wet thud of his body hitting the gravel and the horrifying gurgle of a severed airway. Simmons. Doc scrambled back, sliding into the line of fire. He ripped open, a med kit, but one look told him it was over. The round had severed the spine and the artery. He's gone, sir, Doc said, looking up, his face pale beneath the night vision goggles. He's gone. Miller stared at the body. For a second, the commander froze. The invincible facade cracked. He looked at the watch on his wrist, then at the map, then at Elara. We leave him, Miller whispered. The words were heavy, violating the core ethos of the teams. No man left behind. But the tactical reality was absolute. They could not carry a dead man and a dying man. They barely had the strength to carry themselves. Strip his gear, Miller ordered, his voice hardening into steel. Take his ammo. Take his water. Destroy the radio. The SEALs moved with robotic stiffness. They stripped their fallen brother, taking the magazines from his vest. It was a ghoulish, necessary task. Elara stood watch, scanning the ridge. She saw a movement, a shadow shifting. She raised her MK-13, compensated for the wind, and fired. The shadow dropped. One, she whispered. She didn't announce the kill. It didn't matter. Miller walked up to her as the team prepared to move. He was shaking, not from fear, but from a cocktail of rage and exhaustion. He shoved his finger into her chest, hard enough to bruise. This is on you, he hissed, his breath sour. If we had inserted at the primary LZ, if we hadn't wasted 2 hours climbing that damn mountain, Simmons would be alive. We would be at the extraction. It was a lie. If they had gone to the primary LZ, they would all be dead. Miller knew it, but he needed a villain. He needed someone to blame so he didn't have to look in the mirror. Elara looked at him, her expression unreadable behind the ballistic glasses. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was losing control, and that terrified him more than the enemy. "We are 5 clicks out, Commander," Elara said softly. "Save the blame for the debrief. Right now, you need to lead them." Miller stared at her, hatred burning in his gaze. "When this is over, Vance, you're done." "Yes, sir," she replied. "Move out!" Miller shouted to the team. They left Simmons in the creek bed, covered with a layer of rocks and dust. The team was smaller now. The formation was tighter. The silence was louder. They walked into the gray light of dawn, the weight of the litter feeling like a coffin. Elara took the rear guard this time, walking backward every few steps, watching the ghosts that trailed them. She checked her pockets. She had 3 magazines left, a half canteen of water, and 25 ambushes still waiting in the dark. The grinder continued. The Reaper drone lay like a broken white bird against the stark gray of the valley floor. Its wings were sheared off. The fuselage crumpled against a monolithic slab of granite. From 500 meters away, it looked like salvation. It meant the mission was almost over. It meant they could go home. "Target in sight," Miller rasped, lowering his binoculars. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his face a mask of dust and determination. "Tex, Martinez, set up a perimeter at the tree line. Doc, stay with Davis. Vance, you're with me. We grab the drive, we blow the bird, and we extract." The team moved with the sluggish, jerky motions of men pushed beyond their physiological limits. They were dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and traumatized by the loss of Simmons. The sight of the objective acted like a shot of adrenaline, but it was a dangerous, jagged energy. They were rushing. Elara scanned the crash site through her scope. The heat shimmer made the air dance, twisting the metal shapes. Something was wrong. "Hold," she said, her voice cutting through the comms. "It's too open. No cover on the approach. And look at the tail section." "What about it?" Miller snapped, already moving forward. "The soil around the empennage is disturbed. Different color than the surrounding wash. Someone has been digging there." "The thing crashed, Vance. It plowed up the dirt." "No," Elara insisted, shifting her aim. "Impact debris fans out. That dirt is piled up. It's a berm. Someone dug in." Miller stopped, looking back at her with eyes that burned with a mixture of exhaustion and contempt. "We have been fighting for 12 hours to get here. The enemy is behind us, engaging our rear guard. We do not have time to analyze the landscaping. We grab the drive." He turned and signaled Reynolds to follow him. "On me. Fast mover execution." Elara stayed prone. Her instincts were screaming. The silence around the crash site was artificial. No birds, no insects. Just the wind hissing over the aluminum. It was a stage, set perfectly for the final act. Miller and Reynolds bounded forward, covering the open ground in seconds. They reached the fuselage. Miller knelt by the avionics bay, prying the panel open with his combat knife. "I've got the drive housing!" Miller called out, his voice triumphant. "Reynolds, prep the thermite charge. We burn the rest." Elara watched the thermal signature through her scope. She saw a thin, cold line running from the avionics bay into the ground beneath the fuselage. A wire. "Commander, freeze!" Elara yelled, abandoning radio discipline. "Do not pull that drive! It's rigged! There's a tension wire!" Miller paused, his hand on the metal cassette. He looked down. He couldn't see the wire from his angle. It was buried in the shadow of the wreck. He looked back at Elara, 500 meters away in the tree line. "You're seeing ghosts again, Vance," Miller muttered. I'm ending this. He yanked the hard drive free. The tension wire snapped. Elara didn't wait for the explosion. She buried her face in the dirt and opened her mouth to equalize the pressure. The world turned white. The blast wasn't just a grenade or a booby trap. It was two 150mm artillery shells buried beneath the drone, daisy-chained together. The explosion obliterated the front half of the fuselage. A shockwave of dust, fire, and shrapnel tore outward, ripping through the air with a force that punched the breath out of Elara's lungs even at this distance. Miller was thrown backward like a rag doll, lifting 10 feet into the air before slamming into the hardpan. Reynolds, who had been closer to the tail, disappeared in a cloud of pink mist and gray smoke. Contact! Contact front! The explosion was the signal. Ambush number 18 initiated instantly. From the ridges overlooking the crash site, heavy machine gun fire erupted, pouring into the kill zone where Miller lay stunned. Mortar rounds began to walk their way toward the tree line where the rest of the team was hiding. "Reynolds is down! Miller is down!" Tex screamed over the radio, the sound of his MK-48 joining the chorus of chaos. "We need cover fire! Smoke! Pop smoke!" Elara rolled onto her side, ignoring the ringing in her ears. She brought her rifle up. Through the dust and smoke, she saw Miller crawling. He was alive, but his movement was erratic. He was concussed, perhaps blinded. She looked for the enemy gunners. They were high up, dug into the cliffs, shooting down into the bowl. It was a turkey shoot. "Smoke is out!" Martinez yelled, throwing canisters that hissed purple and white clouds into the valley. Elara took a breath. She had to make a decision. She could stay in the tree line, safe, and wait for them to die. Or she could expose herself to buy them seconds. She saw a glimmer on the cliff face, the optics of an enemy sniper waiting for a rescuer. One breath, one squeeze. She fired. The enemy sniper's head snapped back. "I'm covering!" Elara shouted into the comms. "Tex, get Miller! Drag him back! Forget the drive! The drive is gone!" Tex broke cover, sprinting into the smoke toward his commander. Bullets kicked up dirt around his boots, snapping like angry hornets. Elara worked the bolt of her rifle, firing as fast as she could acquire targets. She wasn't aiming to kill anymore. She was aiming to keep their heads down. Crack. Rack. Crack. Rack. Tex grabbed Miller by the drag handle and heaved him backward. They stumbled through the smoke, collapsing into the relative safety of a shallow ditch near the tree line. The drone was gone. Reynolds was vaporized. Miller was incoherent. The mission, the objective they had bled for, was nothing more than a smoking crater. Elara lowered her rifle, the barrel radiating heat. She looked at the devastation. They had walked right into it, driven by arrogance and a refusal to listen to the silence. "Pull back," she whispered, realizing no one else was giving orders. "Pull back to the ridge. We're done here." The valley answered with another mortar round, closer this time. The hunt wasn't over. It had just entered the slaughter phase. The term "broken arrow" refers to a unit that has been overrun, a desperate cry for any and all air support to strike the sender's coordinates, to wipe out the enemy along with the friendly unit. It is the last resort of the damned. But there was no radio. There was no air support. There was only the dust, the blood, and the mortars. "Get up! Get him up!" Tex was screaming, his voice shredding through the ringing in Elara's ears. He was hauling Miller by the back of his plate carrier. The commander was dead weight, his eyes wide and unfocused, blood trickling from both ears, a severe concussion from the blast wave. "My drive," Miller mumbled, his speech slurred, grasping at the air. I The drive. The drive is gone, sir! Tex roared, shaking him. Reynolds is gone! We have to move! A mortar round impacted 20 meters to their left, the ground heaving like a dying animal. Shrapnel zipped through the air, shearing branches off the scrub brush. The enemy wasn't just suppressing them anymore. They were bracketing for the kill. They sensed the weakness. They could smell the panic. Elara slid into the ditch next to Doc, who was shielding Davis's body with his own. Davis was conscious, but gray, his eyes rolling back. Doc, can we move him? Elara demanded, grabbing the medic's shoulder. He's lost a liter of blood. If we run, he bleeds out. Doc yelled back, his hands slick with red. If we stay, he vaporizes, Elara countered. She looked at the team. They were shattered. Miller was out of the fight. Reynolds was a memory. Martinez was firing wildly over the berm, wasting ammo. They were 5 seconds away from a complete tactical collapse. Elara stood up. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was the survival mechanism of a creature that refused to die. Martinez, cease fire! Her voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the panic. Tex, grab Miller. Doc, take the feet. I've got the head. We are moving to the limestone shelf at 2 o'clock. 300 meters. That's uphill, Martinez argued, turning his dusty face toward her. We're exposed. It's a cave system, Elara lied. She didn't know if it was a system, but she had seen the dark fissures in the rock face earlier. It was hard cover. Move, now! She grabbed the handles of the litter. The weight was crushing. With Reynolds dead and Miller incapacitated, they were down to 4 effectives to carry 2 casualties and fight a rearguard action. Go, go, go! They broke cover. It was the longest 300 meters of their lives. The enemy saw them move. The small arms fire intensified, bullets kicking up spurts of dirt around their feet. It felt like running through a swarm of angry bees. Elara dragged the litter backward, her heels digging into the loose scree. Her lungs burned as if she were inhaling broken glass. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest. She watched the ridgeline, firing single-handed with her MK-18, which she had scavenged from a dead teammate earlier, abandoning the bolt action for volume, forcing the enemy heads down just enough to buy a few steps. They're flanking left, Tex yelled, firing his machine gun from the hip as he half-carried, half-dragged Miller. Ignore them, Elara ordered. Push for the rocks. A bullet struck the litter frame, sparking near Davis's head. He groaned, a weak, wet sound. Almost there, Doc grunted, stumbling. Elara dropped the litter handle and spun around, emptying her magazine into a cluster of fighters who had broken cover to chase them. 3 of them dropped, the others scattered. The aggression of her response bought them the final 10 seconds they needed. They crashed into the shadow of the limestone shelf. Elara found the opening, a narrow fissure behind a fallen slab of granite. It wasn't just a crack. It opened into a deep recess. Inside. Get them inside. They shoved the litter through the gap. Tex threw Miller in after it. Martinez dived in last, just as a mortar round slammed into the shelf outside, showering the entrance with rock shards. The silence inside was sudden and disorienting. The cave was cool, damp, and smelled of bat guano and ancient dust. The light from the entrance filtered in, a single shaft of gray illumination in the gloom. The team collapsed. Tex slid down the wall, his chest heaving, ripping his helmet off. Doc immediately went back to work on Davis, checking tourniquets. Miller sat against a stalagmite, staring at his hands, blinking slowly as his brain tried to reboot. Elara didn't sit. She moved to the entrance, staying in the shadows, keeping her weapon trained on the slice of the outside world. Check in, she whispered. Tex, green. 1 mag left for the saw. Martinez, green. 2 mags. Doc, I'm out of gauze. I'm using his shirt. Elara looked at Miller. The commander looked up, his eyes finally focusing on her. There was no arrogance left, just confusion and a dull, throbbing pain. Vance, Miller rasped. Where are we? We're in a hole, sir, Elara said, not turning around. And they're stacking up outside. She checked her own ammo. 1 full magazine, 1 in the weapon, a pistol with 2 clips. They were alive, but they were trapped. The broken arrow had been fired, but no one had heard it. The realization settled over the cave like a shroud. They weren't a SEAL team anymore. They were prey that had gone to ground. What's the plan? Martinez asked, his voice trembling slightly. He looked at Miller, but Miller didn't answer. He looked at Tex. Tex shook his head. Then, slowly, all eyes turned to Elara. She felt the weight of their gaze. It was heavier than the ruck, heavier than the litter. It was the burden of their lives. She hated it. She wanted to be alone, a ghost in the hills, answerable only to herself. But she couldn't leave them. We wait for nightfall, Elara said, her voice steady. We triage the wounds, we redistribute ammo, and then we bleed them when they try to come in. She looked out at the sun-drenched rocks where Reynolds had died. Nobody dies in here, she lied. Not today. The cave was a tomb waiting to be sealed. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the sour reek of unwashed bodies. Outside, the occasional crump of a mortar round reminded them that the enemy was patient. Inside, the only sound was the wet, bubbling rasp of Davis's breathing. Doc, status? Elara asked, her voice low. She was crouched by the entrance, using a shard of mirror to watch the reflection of the slope outside without exposing her head. He's septic, Doc whispered, his hands trembling as he adjusted the dressing on Davis's ruined leg. The tourniquet has been on too long. The tissue is dying. If we don't get him to a surgical team in 6 hours, he loses the leg. 12 hours, he loses his life. Give him another hit of morphine, Tex grunted from the back of the cave, where he was stripping rounds from a jam-prone magazine. We're out, Doc said, looking up, his eyes hollow. I used the last ampule on the ridge. He's feeling everything. Give him the fentanyl lollipop, Miller's voice cut through the gloom. The commander was sitting upright against a stalagmite. The glazed look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a jagged, feverish clarity. He wiped a trickle of dried blood from his ear. We don't have any, sir, Doc replied quietly. Reynolds had the med pack. Reynolds is dead. Miller flinched at the name. He looked around the cave, taking in the scene. His elite team reduced to 3 battered shooters and a dying man, hiding in a hole like animals. His gaze landed on Elara, who was still positioned at the command spot by the door. Vance, Miller barked. It was a command, not a question. Get off the door. Tex, take point. Vance, check the comms again. See if you can boost the signal with the cavern walls. Elara didn't move. She didn't look at him. The radio is dead, Miller. The crystal is shattered. Physics doesn't change because you give it an order. Miller struggled to his feet, using the rock wall for support. He swayed, his face flushing with anger. Stand down, Sergeant. You are relieved. I am assuming command. You have a concussion, Elara said calmly, still watching the mirror. You're compromised. Sit down before you fall down. I am the OIC of this element, Miller shouted, his voice echoing too loudly in the confined space. You are a support attachment. You are here to carry batteries and take notes. You do not give orders to Tier 1 operators." Tex and Martinez looked down, uncomfortable. They knew Miller was right on paper, but they also knew Elara was the only reason they weren't rotting in the sun back at the crash site. Miller stumbled toward her, his hand resting on his pistol grip. "I read your file, Vance. 1 tour. 2018. Administrative support in a green zone. You think because you got lucky with a few shots today that you're one of us? You don't know the first thing about warfare." Elara slowly lowered the mirror. She turned to face him. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint and dirt, but her eyes were piercingly clear. "You read the redacted file, Miller," she said softly. "I read what matters," he sneered. 1 tour. Amateur hour." "It was 1 tour," Elara admitted, stepping closer to him. She was smaller than him, but in that moment she seemed to loom. 3 years. Continuous. Without rotation, without mail, without a badge. 3 years? Miller scoffed. "Doing what? Filing reports?" "Aleppo," she said. The word hung in the air like a curse. Even the SEALs went quiet. Aleppo in 2018 was hell on earth, a meat grinder of chemical weapons, barrel bombs, and factional infighting. No U.S. military units were officially there. "I was sad," Elara continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "Special Activities Division, paramilitary. My job wasn't to kick down doors and take selfies, Miller. My job was to embed with the local militias and turn them into a hammer. I lived in the rubble for 38 months. I ate rats. I drank radiator water." She took another step. Miller retreated slightly, his back hitting the cold stone. "You talk about ambushes?" Elara's eyes drifted to the scar on her neck, visible above her collar. "I survived 27 before I stopped counting. I watched my entire cell get executed in a basement in Idlib because our extraction team decided the LZ was too hot, just like you wanted to do." She pointed a finger at his chest. "So yes, it was 1 tour, because after that, there was nothing left of me to deploy again. They put me in a cage, gave me a medal I can't wear, and told me to be a sniper instructor. But don't you dare tell me I don't know warfare. You visit war, Miller. I lived in it." Silence stretched in the cave, thick and suffocating. Tex stopped loading his mag. Doc looked up from Davis. Miller stared at her. He looked for the lie, but he found only the dead, flat stare of a predator that had eaten its own kind to survive. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving a tired, broken man. "What's the play?" Miller asked, his voice a whisper. It was a concession, a surrender. Elara turned back to the entrance, picking up her mirror. "We wait until the moon sets," she said, resuming her watch. "Then we break out the back. We don't go to the extract. We go to the hunter." "The hunter?" Martinez asked. "The enemy commander," Elara said. "He thinks we're running. So we stop running. We hunt him." Miller slid down the wall, sitting back on the dirt. He looked at his hands, then at the woman standing guard. He didn't say another word. The chain of command had been broken, and for the first time in the mission, he was okay with it. The sun began to dip below the jagged teeth of the western ridge, painting the valley in bruised hues of purple and blood orange. Twilight was the sniper's hour, the gray time when night vision washed out and the naked eye struggled with depth perception. Inside the fissure, Elara tightened the straps on her rucksack. The mood had shifted from despair to a cold, brittle resolve. Miller sat cleaning his pistol, his hands steady despite the concussion. "Here is the board," Elara whispered. drawing a map in the dust with a knife tip. They are set up in a horseshoe around the cave entrance. They expect us to come out shooting, or to wait for them to flush us out. We do neither. She pointed to a steep, jagged chimney of rock ascending directly above their cave entrance. It was a suicide climb for a fresh man, let alone an exhausted team carrying a casualty. "We go up?" Tex whispered, looking at the ceiling of the cave where a narrow fissure revealed the sky. "With Davis?" "No," Elara said. "You go right. You hug the shadow of the shelf. It's a goat trail, barely 2 feet wide. It leads to the upper ridge." "And the enemy?" Miller asked. "I'm going left," Elara said flatly. "I'm going to make a lot of noise. I'm going to make them think we're breaking out toward the valley floor. When they turn to engage me, you move. You have a 30-second window. If you hesitate, you die." Miller looked at her. He understood the math. She was the distraction. She was the flare thrown into the dark to draw the wolves. "That's a one-way trip, Vance," Miller said quietly. "It's the only trip," she replied, checking her suppressor. "Once you hit the ridge, move to Point Bravo. Don't wait for me." She didn't wait for a debate. She stood up, checking her gear. She took the last fragmentation grenade from Martinez's vest. "Move on my initiation," she commanded. Elara slipped out of the cave entrance, pressing her body into the cold limestone. The air was cooling rapidly, the wind picking up. She could smell them. Unwashed bodies, cheap tobacco, gun oil. The enemy was close, maybe 40 meters out, tucked behind the boulders. She moved low, a shadow detaching from the darkness. She crawled 10 meters to the left, away from the team's exit route. She found a spot behind a fallen log. She pulled the pin on the grenade, let the spoon fly, and counted. 1, 2. She threw it high and long, aiming for the center of the horseshoe formation. Boom. The explosion was a thunderclap in the confined valley. Screams erupted. Dust billowed. "Contact left! Contact left!" The enemy voices shouted in Pashto. Elara rose to a knee and opened fire. She didn't use her sniper skills this time. She hammered the trigger, firing rapid, aggressive bursts to simulate a heavy assault. She shifted positions after every burst, moving further left, drawing the line of fire with her. Bullets began to chew up the ground around her. Stone chips sprayed her face. The enemy took the bait. They turned their weapons toward the noise, pouring fire into the left flank. "Go, go, go!" Miller's voice hissed over the localized comms. To her right, in the shadows, the team moved. Tex and Martinez carried the litter, their muscles straining, veins popping in their necks as they navigated the narrow goat trail. Doc guarded the rear, weapon trained on the enemy's backs. Elara kept firing. Her magazine ran dry. She dropped it, reloaded, and kept shooting. She was the loudest thing in the valley. A one-woman army screaming defiance. She saw the muzzle flashes turning toward her. A PKM machine gun opened up, the rounds cracking past her head like whips. She was pinned. This was the moment she had calculated. The moment she would likely die to buy them the ridge. But the team was moving too slow. The litter snagged on a rock. "Clear it! Clear it!" Tex grunted, heaving. An enemy fighter on the periphery turned. He wasn't looking at Elara. He was looking at the dust kicked up by the team's struggle. He shouted a warning, pointing at the goat trail. Elara saw him. She swung her rifle, acquiring the target. She dropped him with a single shot to the chest, but the warning had been given. "Ambush! Flank right!" A second group of fighters, hidden in a spider hole near the trail, popped up. They had been the reserve force, the backstop. "Contact rear!" Martinez screamed. Martinez, who was holding the front right handle of the litter, let go with one hand to bring his rifle up. He fired blindly, suppressing the spider hole. "Keep moving," Martinez yelled, shoving the litter forward, taking the weight on his shoulder. "Get Davis clear!" The fighter in the hole fired a blind burst from an AK-47. It wasn't accurate fire, but at 10 meters it didn't need to be. The rounds struck Martinez in the side, bypassing the ballistic plate. He grunted, a sharp, surprised sound, and crumpled. The litter dropped, slamming into the rocks. Davis groaned. "Martinez!" Doc spun around, firing 2 rounds into the spider hole, silencing the enemy. Elara watched from her position 50 meters away. She saw Martinez fall. She saw the team freeze. "Leave him!" Elara screamed into the radio. "Get the package to the ridge! Move or you all die!" Miller grabbed the litter handle where Martinez had been. "Tex, lift! Doc, cover!" They heaved the litter up, stepping over Martinez's body. The young SEAL reached up, grabbing Miller's pant leg for a second. Then his hand fell away. He was choking on blood, his eyes finding the first stars of the night. Elara broke cover. She couldn't save Martinez, but she could punish them. She sprinted across the open ground, abandoning her position, firing on the run to suppress the fighters closing in on the team. She reached the base of the goat trail as the team crested the ridge. She turned, emptying her last rifle magazine into the darkness below. "Martinez is KIA." Miller gasped over the comms, his voice breaking. "We are on the ridge." Elara scrambled up the rocks, her breath tearing at her throat. She didn't look back at the body on the trail. There was no time. The enemy was swarming the lower shelf. She crested the ridge and collapsed next to Tex. They were out of the bowl. They were high up now. But the Khost was carved into the empty space where Martinez should have been. "We keep moving," Elara said, changing her magazine with trembling hands. "They'll be on this ridge in 10 minutes. Ambush number 22 was over. The team was down to 4, and the night was only getting darker. The wind on the ridge of bones did not blow. It screamed. It tore through the jagged peaks of the coast range, carrying with it the freezing dust of the high desert and the sound of their own ragged breathing. They were ghosts now, specters of the men who had inserted 36 hours ago. Miller walked with a limp, his concussion making the world tilt on its axis. Tex carried the front of the litter alone, his massive frame bent almost double, grunting with every step. Doc had the rear, his face a mask of dried tears and dirt. Davis, strapped to the frame, was silent. Whether he was alive or dead, no one had checked in the last hour. It didn't matter. They carried him anyway. "Checkpoint," Miller rasped, checking his wrist GPS. The screen was cracked, glowing with a spider web of green light. "We are 200 meters from the crest. Point Zulu, extraction is on the other side." "It's too quiet," Elara said. She was trailing 5 meters behind, her eyes glued to the scope of her MK-13. The thermal battery was dying, the image flickering between white-hot clarity and gray fuzz. "Don't start, Vance," Tex growled, not looking back. "We're almost there. Just let us get off this damn rock." They reached a depression in the ridge line, a natural saddle that offered the only traversable path to the summit. It was a perfect choke point. To the left, a sheer drop of 1,000 feet. To the right, a vertical wall of granite. Ahead, the path rose steeply to the crest where the helicopter would land. Elara stopped. She dropped to a knee, steadying her rifle on a rock. She scanned the crest line. Nothing. Just cold rocks. But then, a flicker. It was tiny. a single pixel of heat in the gray wash of the thermal scope. It appeared for a second, then vanished behind a boulder. "Lieutenant Commander?" Elara's voice was a flat line over the comms, devoid of the panic that should have been there. "That heat signature isn't a goat. It's a spotter. Adjust your sector scan left, 30 degrees. Miller stopped. He looked at the crest through his night vision monocular. "Negative, Vance. We have clear air. I see rocks. Stop seeing ghosts." "It's a fatal funnel, Miller," Elara pressed, her finger hovering over the safety. "They want you to push the ridge. That saddle is a kill box. Pull back to the defilade. Now." Miller turned to look at her. In the pale moonlight, he looked like a dead man walking. His eyes were sunk deep into his skull. He was desperate. He could practically hear the rotors of the rescue bird in his mind. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, he knew he would never stand up again. "We are Tier 1, Sergeant," Miller hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of pride and delirium. "We don't hide in holes. We assault through. Echo 2, initiate suppression on my mark." Elara closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She saw the geometry of the ambush in her mind. It wasn't just a sniper. It was a Dragunov SVD on the left flank to pin them, and a heavy machine gun on the right to cut them down. It was the L-shaped ambush, the oldest trick in the book, and Miller was walking right into the corner. "If you crest that ridge, Miller, I can't cover you," Elara said softly. "You're walking into a grave." Miller sneered, a horrific expression on his battered face. "Watch us work, Vance. Echo leader out." The radio clicked off. Miller signaled Tex and Doc. "On me, violence of action. We punch through the top and secure the LZ." "Moving," Tex grunted, shifting the weight of the litter. Elara watched them go. She didn't follow. She couldn't. To follow them was to die without purpose. Instead, she crawled backward, sliding into a narrow fissure in the rocks, the defilade she had begged them to take. She set up her rifle, dialing the scope for the crest. She couldn't stop the ambush, but maybe, just maybe, she could punish the executioners. The SEALs moved up the slope. They were loud, aggressive, their boots crunching on the loose shale. Miller raised his rifle, ready to fire at the first sign of resistance. They reached the halfway point of the saddle. The wind died for a split second. Crack. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp, whip-crack report of a 7.62 50-kilometer round, breaking the sound barrier. Tex stumbled. He didn't scream. He just dropped to one knee, the litter slipping from his grip. A dark stain blossomed instantly on his shoulder. "Contact front!" Miller screamed, bringing his weapon up. "Suppress! Suppress!" But there was nothing to suppress. The shot had come from nowhere. Then the machine gun opened up. From the rocks to their right, a PKM unleashed a torrent of fire. The tracers were green lasers cutting through the darkness, hammering into the exposed ground where the SEALs stood. The trap had sprung. It wasn't just a sniper, it was a platoon. The ridgeline erupted with muzzle flashes, a ring of fire looking down on the three men trapped in the bowl. "We're pinned! We're pinned!" Doc yelled, throwing himself over Davis's body as rounds chewed up the dirt around them. Miller fired wildly, his rounds sparking harmlessly off the granite high above. "Vance! Vance! Where is the cover fire?" Elara was 500 meters back, watching the slaughter through her scope. She saw the heat signature of the PKM gunner. She squeezed the trigger. Thwack! The gunner's head snapped back. The machine gun stopped. But it didn't matter. Another gunner took his place instantly. The volume of fire was overwhelming. The SEALs were trapped in the open on a steep slope, with a casualty. "They're flanking!" Tex screamed, trying to lift his weapon with one good arm. "They're coming down the chute!" Elara watched as shadows detached from the ridgeline, sliding down the rocks like liquid darkness. They were closing the distance to finish it with grenades. "Pull back!" Elara screamed into the dead radio. "Miller, drop the litter and pull back!" But Miller couldn't hear her, or he wouldn't listen. He stood up, roaring a challenge that was lost in the wind, firing his empty rifle at the mountain that was killing them. This was the end. The 27th ambush wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The kill zone was a cauldron of green light and shredding metal. From her position in the narrow fissure, 300 meters back and 40 meters elevated, Elara watched the end of SEAL Team Echo through the lens of her scope. It was a silent movie of horrific violence. The distance stole the screams, leaving only the visual data of bodies jerking under the impact of heavy-caliber rounds. "Vance! Vance! Target right! 3 o'clock!" Miller's voice was a jagged tear in her earpiece, distorted by the volume of fire and his own panic. Elara didn't answer. She couldn't. She shifted her crosshairs. She saw Tex, the massive heavy gunner, trying to rise. He had lost his weapon. He was pulling his sidearm, a SIG P2 T6, lifting it toward the darkness. A burst from the PKM caught him in the chest plate. The ceramic shattered. He fell backward, his legs twitching once before going still. "Tex is down!" Doc screamed. "I can't reach him! I can't—" The medic was huddled over Davis's litter, using his own body as a shield. It was a noble, futile gesture. A grenade landed 5 meters uphill. The explosion was a dull thump that rolled down the saddle. Doc was thrown sideways, his body limp, rolling down the scree slope until he wedged against a boulder. Davis, still strapped to the litter, didn't move. He was likely dead before the grenade. Now, it was just Miller. The commander had crawled behind the only cover available, a low, flat rock barely large enough to hide his torso. He was pinned. The enemy fire had slackened, shifting from suppression to precision. They were toying with him now. They knew he was the last one. "Vance!" Miller screamed again, his voice cracking. "I know you're there. Take the shot. Clear the ridge." Elara saw the enemy fighters descending from the crest. There were 12 of them. They moved with casual confidence, stepping over the rocks, their weapons trained on Miller's position. She lined up her shot. She had the lead fighter in her crosshairs. Center mass. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Stop. Her training kicked in. The cold, reptilian logic of the SAD paramilitary officer overrode the human impulse to help. If she fired, she would kill one man, maybe two. But the remaining 10 would immediately pinpoint her muzzle flash. She was in a cul-de-sac with no exit. Firing meant death. Not just for her, but it would confirm to the enemy that there was a survivor to hunt. She eased pressure off the trigger. She exhaled. "I can't," she whispered, her voice so soft it didn't even key the mic. "Vance, God damn it!" Miller was sobbing now. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. He was just a man alone in the dark, bleeding from a dozen shrapnel wounds. "Don't leave me here! Don't let them take me!" The enemy fighters stopped 10 meters from Miller. They stopped shooting. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the silence of the predator standing over the prey. One of the fighters said something in Pashto. A command. 2 men moved forward, weapons raised. They were going to take him alive. A SEAL commander was a trophy, a propaganda video waiting to happen. Miller saw them. He looked back over his shoulder, scanning the darkness where he had left Elara. He couldn't see her. She was a shadow within a shadow. "Vance," he whispered. The anger was gone. It was just a plea. Elara watched him through the scope. She saw the realization hit him. She wasn't going to save him. She had warned him. She had told him this would happen. And now, she was doing the only thing she could do. Witness it. Miller slumped against the rock. He reached into his vest pouch. He didn't pull out a magazine. He pulled out an M67 fragmentation grenade. He looked at the approaching fighters. He looked at the sky. "Echo leader," Miller said, his voice strangely calm over the radio. "Broken arrow, danger close, coordinates, my position." He pulled the pin. He didn't throw it. He held it to his chest, clutching it like a talisman. "Goodbye, Elara." The fighters lunged for him. Flash. The explosion was contained, muffled by Miller's body and the armor plate. It wasn't a cinematic fireball. It was a sharp, brutal, concussive snap that lifted Miller off the ground and threw the two nearest fighters backward. The radio link cut to static. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She kept her eye on the scope. The remaining fighters shouted in anger. They fired into Miller's broken body, wasting bullets on a corpse. Then they moved to the others. They checked techs. They checked doc, pop, the dead check, single shots to the head to ensure no one was playing possum. Elara lay perfectly still. Her heart rate was 40 beats per minute. Her breathing was shallow, invisible. She was not a soldier anymore. She was a rock. She was the dust. She was the one-tour liability who had outlived the elite. The enemy lingered for 10 minutes. They stripped the weapons from the bodies. They took the radios. They cheered, raising their rifles to the sky. Then, slowly, they began to move back up the ridge. They didn't sweep the lower defilade. Why would they? They had killed the whole team. They had won. Elara waited. She waited until the last footfall faded. She waited until the wind was the only sound in the valley. She waited until the cold seeped into her bones and her fingers were numb. Only then did she lower the rifle. She rested her forehead against the cold stone of the fissure. She didn't cry. Tears blurred vision. Tears dehydrated the body. She checked her watch. Zo 400 Zulu, 2 hours until dawn. She was alone. 27 ambushes. And this time, she was the only ghost left to tell the story. "Copy, Echo Leader," she whispered into the dead air. "End of mission." She began to move, not up toward the bodies, but deeper into the rocks. The mission had changed. It was no longer about extraction. It was about evasion, and the hunt was far from over. Elara did not move for 45 minutes. She lay wedged in the fissure, covered by a gray thermal blanket she had pulled from her survival pouch, a piece of kit the SEALs had mocked as camping gear. Now it was the only thing masking her heat signature from the eyes scanning the ridge. The enemy patrol had moved up and over the crest, celebrating their victory. But a rear guard remained. She could hear them. 2 men speaking in low tones, kicking through the debris field of the ambush site, looking for souvenirs. She had to move. The cold was seeping through her core, stiffening her muscles. If she stayed, hypothermia would kill her before the sun rose. If she moved, the sentries might kill her. The choice was between a slow death and a fast one. She chose the fast one. Elara slid the thermal blanket off, folding it silently. She began to crawl. It wasn't the crawl of a soldier in training. It was the movement of a reptile. She moved only when the wind gusted, masking the sound of fabric on stone. She dragged her body down the scree slope, away from the ridgeline, toward the dark shape of a boulder where she had seen Doc fall. It took her 20 minutes to cover 50 meters. She found him. Doc was wedged between two slabs of granite, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. The fall had likely killed him before the grenade shrapnel did. He was already cold to the touch. Elara felt a pang of grief, sharp and sudden, but she strangled it. Grief was for the debrief. Right now, Doc was a resource. She ran her hands over his vest. His rifle was gone, lost in the fall or taken by gravity. His pistol was there, but the slide was jammed with grit. She checked his radio pouch. Empty. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The enemy must have found him. No. She looked down. The pouch was ripped. She scanned the ground in the moonlight. There, lying in the dust 3 feet away, was the PRC-148 radio. The connection cable to the headset had snapped, but the main housing looked intact. She reached out, her fingers brushing the plastic. She grabbed it, pulling it into her chest. She checked the display. Cracked, but faint green numbers glowed. Battery, 12%. It was enough. "Hey!" The shout came from above. Elara froze. A flashlight beam swept over the rocks, missing her by inches. The rear guard had heard something. Maybe the shift of gravel, maybe the ghost of a sound. She pressed herself against Doc's body, using the corpse as concealment. The beam swept back, lingering on the boulder. "Nothing," a voice said in Pashto. "Just the wind." "Check it," another voice commanded. This voice was different, deeper, authoritative. Elara recognized the cadence. It was the commander, the architect of the ambushes. He hadn't left with the main force. He was staying behind to inspect his handiwork. She peered through the gap between Doc's arm and torso. She saw him. He was standing on a ledge 20 meters above her, silhouetted against the stars. He wasn't looking at the ground. He was looking at a tablet, likely reviewing drone footage or messaging his superiors. He wore a shema, but his posture was arrogant, relaxed. He was the brain. The others were just fingers. If she called for extraction now, he would hear it. He would coordinate the hunt. He had to go. Elara slowly unholstered her pistol. She had 2 magazines left. She checked the chamber. Brass. But a pistol shot at 20 meters in the dark. It was risky. She looked at Doc's vest again. A flashbang grenade and a combat knife. She took the knife. She didn't need to shoot him. She needed to make him disappear. Elara left the radio with Doc. She couldn't climb with it. She moved laterally, circling around the base of the ledge. She climbed the rock face from the blind side, finding handholds in the cracks. Her fingers were numb, tearing on the sharp limestone, but she didn't feel the pain. She felt only the cold, hard drive of the mission. She crested the ledge. The commander was there, 5 feet away, his back to her. The other sentry was 10 meters down the slope, smoking a cigarette. Elara rose. She didn't lunge. She stepped forward, silent as smoke. She grabbed the commander's shoulder with her left hand, spinning him around while driving the blade into the soft hollow of his throat with her right. It was violent, intimate, and silent. He tried to shout, but only a wet gurgle escaped. His eyes went wide, locking onto hers. He saw the face of the woman he thought he had killed. He saw the dirt, the blood, and the utter lack of mercy. She held him as he sagged, lowering him to the ground so he wouldn't make a sound. She held him until the struggles stopped, until the eyes glazed over. She felt nothing. No triumph, no vengeance. He was just an obstacle she had removed from the board. She took his tablet. She took his radio. and then she looked at the sentry down the slope. She raised the commander's rifle, an AK-74 with an optic, which was leaning against the rock. She lined up the shot on the smoker. Phut. The sentry dropped. Elara dropped the rifle. She was done with killing. Now she had to save herself. She scrambled back down to Doc's body. She grabbed the PRC-148. She plugged in the handset she had scavenged from the commander's dead radio. She keyed the mic. Any station, this is Echo, Echo 5, she whispered, reverting to her own call sign, realizing Echo leader was gone. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Static. Echo 5, blind transmission, coordinates follow. She read the grid off the commander's tablet, which had her exact location pinned. Request immediate extraction. Hot LZ, I am the only survivor. I say again, only survivor. She released the key. She waited. Silence. Then a voice cut through the static, clear and American. Echo 5, this is Outlaw 26. We are on station. We heard the explosion. We have your heat signature. We see 2 bodies on the ledge. Is that you? Negative, Elara said, her voice cracking. I am in the defilade. Those are hostiles. Copy, Echo 5. Keep your head down. We are inbound. ETA 2 mics. We are bringing the rain. Elara slumped back against the rock. 2 minutes. It might as well be 2 years. She checked her pistol. Empty. She checked the commander's rifle. She had left it up there. She was defenseless. Winchester, she whispered to the empty valley. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind. And then, beneath the wind, she heard it. The low, thrumming beat of rotors, the sound of angels, the sound of war machines. She reached out and took Doc's cold hand. We're going home, she said. But she knew it was a lie. Only she was going home. The rest of them, Miller, Tex, Reynolds, Martinez, Simmons, Doc, they belonged to the valley now. They were part of the silence. The valley, which had been a cathedral of silence for 72 hours, was torn apart by the god of war. Outlaw 26 engaging, danger close. The sky ripped open. An AC-130 gunship, circling high in the orbit above, unleashed its 30mm cannon. The sound was a guttural, tearing buzz, like canvas being ripped by a giant's hands. The ridge line where the enemy patrol had celebrated moments ago evaporated in a line of geysering fire and rock. Elara didn't flinch. She pressed her face into the dirt next to Doc's body, shielding her eyes from the strobe light intensity of the secondary explosions. The ground shook violently, vibrating through her chest cavity. Then came the wind. The MH-60 Pavehawk flared hard over the defilade, its rotors churning, the dusty air into a blinding brownout. The downwash was punishing, flattening the scrub brush, stinging exposed skin with gravel. 2 figures fast roped down before the wheels even touched the earth. PJs, pararescue men. They moved with a different kind of energy, frantic, urgent benevolence. One of them knelt beside Elara, checking her pupils, his hands moving over her limbs, looking for blood sweeps. Echo 5, can you move? The PJ shouted over the rotor roar. Elara nodded. She pushed his hand away, sitting up. She pointed to Doc. He's gone, she mouthed. The words were lost, but the PJ understood. He checked Doc's carotid, shook his head, and signaled the crew chief. Load her up, we're burning fuel. The others, the second PJ yelled, scanning the darkness of the ridge. Where is the rest of the package? Where is Miller? Elara stood up. Her legs felt like wood. She grabbed the PJ's vest, pulling him down to her level. She leaned into his ear. There is no package, she screamed. Just me. The PJ froze. He looked at her, then at the ridgeline burning above them, then back at the helicopter. He tapped his helmet, relaying the message to the pilot. One survivor. RTB. They didn't take dock. There was no time, and the weight restrictions for a hot, high-altitude extract were strict. They would come back for the bodies later. For now, they saved the living. Elara was hauled into the cabin. The floor was cold metal. She sat near the door gunner, her feet dangling over the edge as the bird banked sharply, pulling G's to escape the kill box. She watched the valley of silence recede. From this height, the 27 ambush sites were just scratches in the dirt. The ridge where Miller died was just a shadow. The crash site where Reynolds vaporized was a smudge of carbon. She didn't feel relief. She felt a hollowing out, a numbness that started in her fingertips and worked its way to her heart. She looked at the empty bench seats opposite her. They should have been filled with 8 men. 8 loud, arrogant, capable men. Now, there was only the vibration of the airframe. Bagram Airfield was a shock to the system. The lights were too bright. The air smelled of Burger King and jet fuel, the smell of safety. Elara walked off the ramp, refusing the stretcher. She was covered in a layer of gray dust that made her look like a statue brought to life. Her eyes were 2 burning coals in a face mask of grime. A reception team was waiting on the tarmac. Not medics. Suits. A colonel she didn't recognize stepped forward, flanked by 2 CIA officers. He looked at the lone figure descending from the helicopter. He looked behind her, waiting for the SEALs. When no one else appeared, his face hardened. "Sergeant Vance," the colonel said, his voice struggling to be heard over the winding down engines. "Report. Status of SEAL Team Echo." Elara stopped. She reached into her dump pouch. She didn't salute. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. She pulled out the items she had carried out of hell. First, the enemy commander's tablet. She slapped it into the colonel's chest. "Intelligence secured," she rasped, her voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "The network is mapped." Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the set of dog tags she had taken from Doc's body before the PJs arrived. It was the only physical piece of the team she could bring home. She held them out. The metal tags jingled softly, a terrible, lonely sound. "Team Echo is KIA, Elara said. "All hands." The colonel stared at the tags. He looked at the CIA officers, who were already exchanging nervous glances. This was a catastrophe. A Tier 1 unit wiped out. "How?" the colonel asked, his voice tight. "Miller. Miller was the best we had. How did you survive when they didn't?" Elara looked at him. She thought about the ridge. She thought about the timeline. She thought about the one tour dossier sitting on a desk somewhere, mocking her. "They fought the war they wanted," Elara said, her eyes drifting past the colonel to the dark mountains in the distance. "I fought the war that was there." She dropped the tags into the colonel's open hand. "Am I released, sir?" The colonel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the woman standing before him. She was slight, battered, and bleeding from a cut on her cheek. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a ghost. "Get her to medical," the colonel muttered, turning away, unable to meet her gaze. "Debrief at 800. Elara walked past them. She walked past the hangars, past the chow hall, past the rows of Humvees. She found a quiet spot behind the barracks, near the perimeter fence. She sat down on a concrete barrier. She pulled a pack of cigarettes from her pocket, stolen from the enemy commander's vest. She lit one. The smoke curled up into the clean night air. She reached into her pocket one last time and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was her orders for the mission. At the top, under her name, it read, Vance Elara. Experience, 1 tour, 2018. She stared at the words. The SEALs had laughed at it. Miller had died because of it. Elara took a drag of the cigarette, the cherry glowing bright orange. She touched the flame to the corner of the paper. She watched it burn. The paper curled, turning to black ash, the words 1 tour disappearing into the wind. She wasn't a liability. She wasn't a quota filler. She was the one who came back. Elara Vance closed her eyes, finally letting the darkness take her. 0 tours remaining. The room was white, blindingly, aggressively white. 48 hours after the extraction, SFC Elara Vance sat at a metal table in a soundproof, secure compartment within the Bagram complex. She was clean. The dirt of the Khost Province had been scrubbed from her skin, the blood washed from her hair. She wore a fresh set of fatigues, crisp and stiff, but the cleanliness felt like a costume. Underneath, she could still feel the phantom weight of the Dragunov recoil and the chill of the grave she had slept in. Across the table sat 2 men. One was the colonel from the tarmac, Colonel Graves. The other was a civilian in a gray suit, no name tag, just a lanyard with a black clearance card. The agency. "Let's go over the timeline one more time, Sergeant," the suit said, tapping a pen against a thick stack of papers. "Specifically, the events at the Ridge of Bones. You stated that Lieutenant Commander Miller ordered a direct assault despite your warning?" "That is correct," Elara said, her voice monotone. She looked at a spot on the wall behind the Suet's head. "And you refused to follow that order?" "I refused to commit suicide, sir. I took a tactical position to provide overwatch. There is a difference." The suit sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sergeant, we have a problem. We have 8 dead Tier 1 operators. The narrative that they were wiped out due to tactical arrogance does not play well in Washington. Heroes don't die because they wouldn't listen to a support attachment." Elara's eyes snapped to his face. They didn't die because of arrogance. They died because they were loud. They died because they treated the Coast Valley like a shooting range instead of a hunting ground. Colonel Graves cleared his throat, stepping in before the tension snapped. "Vance, what Mr. Sterling is trying to say is that the official AAR needs to be nuanced. Miller detonated a grenade to prevent capture. That's a Medal of Honor action. We need to preserve that. He did it to save himself from a knife," Elara said coldly. "But give him the medal. I don't care. It won't bring him back." The suit, Sterling, leaned forward. He opened a file folder, her file. The same one Miller had mocked. "We have reviewed the recovered data from the enemy commander's tablet," Sterling said, his tone shifting to begrudging respect. "You neutralized the entire command cell. You single-handedly disrupted a major insurgent network. The ballistics matched the rifle we found on the ledge. It was impressive work." He picked up a stamp. "We are going to update this." Sterling gestured to the 1 tour line. "We can't have an asset of your caliber listed as administrative support. We're going to read you into the SAD program officially. You'll get your credit. You'll get the stars." Elara looked at the file. She saw the words, 1 tour. She remembered Miller's laugh. She remembered the enemy sentries ignoring the empty rocks where she lay hidden. She remembered the freedom of being invisible. "No," Elara said. Sterling paused, the stamp hovering. "Excuse me?" "Don't change it," she said. "Leave it as it is. Sergeant, you just survived a 72-hour running gunfight and eliminated a high-value target. You deserve the recognition. You deserve the rank. Rank puts you in a room like this, Elara said, standing up. Rank makes you loud. Rank makes people think they know what you can do. She leaned her hands on the table, looking Sterling in the eye. The SEALs died because they thought they were invincible. They looked at my file and saw a liability. That mistake saved my life. If the enemy looks at my file and sees a ghost operative, they'll hunt me. If they see a clerk with one tour, they'll never see me coming. The room went silent. The hum of the AC seemed to get louder. Sterling stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered the stamp. He closed the folder. One tour, Sterling repeated, a dry smile touching his lips. Very well. Your involvement in Operation Blind Faith is hereby classified top secret. As far as the Army is concerned, you were never in the valley. I was never there, Elara confirmed. She turned and walked to the door. Vance, Colonel Graves called out. She stopped, hand on the latch. What are you going to do now? Elara didn't look back. She thought of the silence. She thought of the cold wind. She thought of the next mission and the next, where she would be nothing more than a shadow in the corner of a briefing room. I have some filing to do, sir, she said. She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The bright lights swallowed her whole. On the table, the file remained closed. The red text on the front cover was stark and misleading, a perfect camouflage for the deadliest weapon in the room.